How's it going, guys? Welcome to another day of U.S. foreign policy processes. Let's jump right in. So for the last class, we had pre-internet media. That was a lot of agenda setting or media deciding what to focus on. So in a way, sort of determining the agenda. Framing effects, that's giving false either or scenarios. Do you support mass surveillance or terrorism? And it's not always the case. In fact, two options is rarely ever the case. 24-hour news and rapid response, the big hair of the 80s and 90s, sensationalist news, investigative journalism, which still continues to be a thing, but long news stories that are focusing on uncovering some sort of corruption in an institution. Generally, that's the case. And then gatekeeping, or who gets to be a journalist and what news stories get to be relevant, similar to agenda setting. So what news is taking all the events of the world, like in this filter, and then filtering it down to the most interesting bits, right? So there's every bus in the world making a bus trip, and then you filter that down to the buses that crash, or the buses that have, some passenger acting out in some way. Maybe a bus driver has a heartwarming story, not heartwarming story, my bad, um, to the most interesting cases. So in this, we're going to talk about post-internet, or how the internet changed a lot. Some would say everything about how news is consumed. This is important for foreign policy because it informs voters in a democracy as to the events going on in the world. So there's still agenda setting, there's still gatekeeping, there's still framing effects, there's still investigative journalism, but now everything is more accessible because there's reduced communication costs. Then we're going to talk about how there's even less gatekeeping than there was before. And inversely, not inversely, but because of less gatekeeping, there's an increased supply and options of what type of media you want to consume. And there's mis, dis, and malinformation, which we have to talk about. Not to say that this was not an issue until the internet, but the internet made it far worse than it is, or than it was. So what do we mean when we talk about reduced communication costs? We're talking about how the introduction of the internet allows for instant communication with anyone who also has an internet connection. Of course, you don't need me to tell you that before the internet, communication with people, even in the other town, was a lot more difficult, much less communicating with a toy supplier in China or some sort of manufacturer in Vietnam. And suddenly you don't need expensive news studio and FCC regulation and approval to share news. You don't have to have a channel to share news. The other alternative before the internet was, and you saw this especially among socialist groups, was independent newspapers in the 60s and 70s, which is of course extrapolated from the independent newspapers we talked about earlier that helped spark the American Revolution. One of the sort of cornerstones of early internet was AOL, or America Online. If you're 32 years or older, you probably know exactly what I'm talking about. Let's just say if you're not a millennial, then you have no idea what this is, or you've only heard of it the same way other generations talk about the phonograph. But it worked through a phone line. So what was very funny was that for the longest time, dial-up internet, as it was called, you couldn't use the phone when you're on the computer. So you'd hear people say, hang up the phone, I need to send an email, which is just wildly outdated now. There's, of course, the You Got Mail voice message. I think that that's like one. Someone did a study back in the day. It's like who's the man who's had his voice played the most in history, and it was the "You've Got Mail" guy. I'm sure that's not the case anymore. Um, but yeah, the early days, and then you have sort of less cute, more cringe stuff, like early Xbox Live did this commercial with this fellow Dark Master, and if you're able to watch these old commercials, they are pretty funny. Um, just people wrapping their minds around what the internet and like live voice chat is very funny because it's like a live voice chat's not that wild of an innovation. Phones have existed for a long time before the internet. Another very funny one is this old Windows 95 instructional video starring, because it was the 90s, um, Matthew Perry, I think his name is, and Jennifer Aniston. I'm not a huge Friends fan. Um, but yeah, if you take a shot of water every time they say the phrase information superhighway. But what this kicks off is other security concerns. There's this 1997 movie, The Jackal, that had Bruce Willis wearing a fat suit. In the movie, he's in disguise, and he's going on to chat rooms, as you can see in this photo on the right, planning out his assassinations. I think I'm the only person in the world who remembers The Jackal. That's what I was watching when everyone else was watching Friends, and even then I was way too young for it. Point being, through all this 90s nostalgia I take you through, um, the internet is very much sort of the Wild West. It's this new, powerful tool that people are still trying to come to grips with. With Bill Gates and the introduction of the personal computer, every house has one, probably not too far from their TV. And it can't do much compared to what computers can do now, but it was the 90s, there wasn't a lot to do. And so people who could get really good at this, like I said, it's the Wild West. So people who could get really good at it were effectively gunslingers. So think of it in terms of how they're presented in media. So we have more of a modern day nerd, me and my arrival in Japan, not threatening at all. Go back a bit, you have the very manly black and red PC. I think this episode is like 2006, but in the 90s, you have this sort of more punk vibe around hackers and um, anyone who's really savvy with computers. This is from the movie Hackers. If you didn't recognize it yet, the lady on the right is a young Angelina Jolie. Point being is that it was almost punk. It was, like I said, gunslingers in the Wild West. If you could really get a grip on what the internet is quickly, you could have a big influence. And of course, this is what really motivated the culture around stuff like The Matrix, which I don't think you could technically say most of the people in these movies were hackers, but this is the vibe a lot of hackers were really aspiring to, which is very funny. In this whole punk countercultural thing was very internet and still remains to be internet as cable news is sort of hanging on to relevance with its the last bit of its strength. So what's interesting is that we talked during the last class about how JFK, the gatekeeping, kept all of JFK's affairs from really leaking to the media or leaking to the public because the media had a vested interest in not reporting on it, so they could retain access um, to the Kennedy administration, to the news, and it becomes less so the case when there's more rumors of another president of the 90s, Bill Clinton, having an affair. There's evidence within a lot of news services that this is going on for reasons we don't have time to go into. But they want to retain access. They want to be called into the Rose Garden for speeches and stuff like that. So they're not going to dig too deep into what's going on because they might not like what they find, or it could have more damaging effects later on. But the thing is if you don't have access, then who cares if you lose access? And this is where the internet really became powerful, was this whole idea of citizen journalism. So one of the first websites to break the Monica Lewinsky scandal was Drudge Report, um, run and operated, I think, solely by Matt Drudge. So citizen journalist. He's working out of an apartment. He's got like a newsletter and I think like an early version of Twitter where you could like click on links and stuff like that. By like an average WordPress website is more powerful than Drudge Report was, just through the process of time, in terms of like what the website's able to do. But there's this guy who's saying that the Clinton administration is covering up an affair, and people are very receptive to that, and we'll go into why. A big reason why is because it's actually being written down and shared in a way that's just not possible before. Talk is cheap, and for most of human history, we haven't been able to read. So we just sort of instinctively trust written words more. It also helps that the Lewinsky affair was real, and the Starr Committee and everything were reporting on facts. So Drudge Report was able to drag the scandal into the mainstream and then make it the scandal that it really would become, as compared to something like JFK, where those scandals pre-internet just sort of died off without anyone really pushing. And what's weird is that there wasn't that much misinformation or malinformation or disinformation on the internet at the time. I guess you could say malinformation. We'll get into that in a second. But it didn't really occur to people that you can just go on the internet and tell lies, at least as much as they do now. A really good example of how trusting people were about the internet in the 90s is this campaign right here. So it's obviously a missing poster for these three film students or film graduates. I believe even in the old ads, the phone number was blocked off because they didn't actually want people to be calling a sheriff, because these three people were not actually missing. This was a very early example of viral marketing. Now, the term viral marketing didn't even exist until over a decade later, but it's this idea of pretending something's real to push a product, normally a fake product, well, exclusively a fake product. But what these three students or recent graduates missing was actually an ad for a movie called The Blair Witch Project. People didn't even have a word for viral marketing. They assumed everything on the internet's real. So when The Blair Witch Project or this found footage horror movie came out, people really didn't know how to react. A lot of people thought that this was real. There's never any like monsters or over-the-top violence or anything in this movie. So it's all very grounded and believable. I believe the only violence that resulted from it was a bunch of college students or film students kicking themselves in the teeth for not thinking of it first, because it was a very ingenious movie for the time, kicking off the found footage horror genre. And yet even this article was written in 2019, it's still remembered as a big sort of a mix between a hoax or viral marketing. It was so new that people didn't really know what to call it. So if people are willing to entertain the possibility that there's a witch, and I think it's set in Pennsylvania, even though it's based off a witch in Tennessee, Fun fact there. The real Blair Witch, called the Bell Witch, is, I believe, in Tennessee. Of course, witches aren't real. But if people are willing to believe that, and there's already the rumors about JFK at this point, then when the internet's reporting on President Bill Clinton, who already has a bit of a reputation as a player, is having an affair, there's really no resistance against that. People are willing to believe it. It also massively helps that the story was true, but Drudge didn't have a ton of evidence to argue that it was true at the time. Still, it forced it into the national conversation in a way that had never really happened before. And as discussed last class, this is part of what played into, well, we won't say it caused, we would never accuse the Clintons of that, but we'll say that it is coincidental timing that right after the Clinton impeachment in February 1999, as a result of the Lewinsky scandal, media attention and focus very quickly shifted to the NATO bombing in Yugoslavia just a month later. Kind of like how there was no word for viral marketing, what Monica Lewinsky herself actually had to go through, there was no word for, but now she's an anti-cyberbullying advocate, and considers herself to be one of the first major victims of cyberbullying, which is quite interesting. And I actually didn't know this until I checked this morning when I was preparing the PowerPoint and going over it one last time. Drudge Report is still up. They're still using the all caps attention grabbing headlines that it had back in the 90s, which is interesting. It's like how Bart Simpson has stayed 10 years old for 30 years. Um, uh, and it looks like I made a mistake with this. I accidentally put in some of my search history in the top tabs there. It's embarrassing. I apologize. Please don't look at it. Anyway, so with the internet, there seems to always be a give and take, right? We have more access to politicians. Inversely, politicians have more access to us. Now, for once, I'm not talking about the surveillance state, Snowden, Assange, and all that. I'm talking about, well, let me show you what I'm talking about. So imagine you've just finished watching Step Brothers, and you've been laughing so hard about the antics of two men in their 40s acting like children for like, what, 90 minutes, 2 hours? Anyway, so to decompress, you decide to fire up your Xbox 360 and play some Grand Theft Auto 4. And then you get a phone call from your friend talking about how great this new show is, and it's called Breaking Bad. I photoshopped out, or didn't Photoshop, I cropped out the entire photo for the sake of all our eyes. But you're interested in learning about this new Breaking Bad show. So what you decide to do is to turn on some Flowrider and boot up Windows Vista and go on to Facebook, but early Facebook when everybody's young and you're just recently coming off needing a college email address to join Facebook, which was a thing at the beginning. By the way, you're playing GTA 4 and using Windows Vista because it's 2008. But as you go onto Facebook, you notice that there's all these ads for this new, young, upcoming politician named Barack Obama. And maybe it influences you to vote for him, maybe it doesn't, but it helps put his name into your mind, which is what the Obama campaign paid a ton of money to do through ads on Facebook. And this would go on to be a big case of politicians harnessing the internet, or in this case, social media, to really energize their careers. The same way people using the internet early on were gunslingers, the people who were really able to use social media early on were a different type of very talented gunslinger in the Wild West that was social media in late early internet days, I guess we would say. Um, and then, of course, the younger Obama campaign absolutely trounced the McCain campaign in use of social media. Of course, young people are more likely to vote Democrat at this time already, but the added advantage is that it's able to get more people to go out to vote point blank. So not converting voters, just nearly as much as it is having voters show up to the polls. Now, with the 2008 and 2012 Obama campaigns, there weren't really that many viral moments. But as social media becomes more ingrained in society, politicians try to become more viral for attention. Great example, not American, of course, but Pierre Polidori eating his apple. Um, this is such a great example of that because whenever I try to remember who's that Canadian Apple guy, I can never remember his name. So I have to search into Google Canadian politician eating apple. But that was viral among the right for a few weeks. There's stuff that is a bit cringy, but to some comes back around as cute. Just chillin' in Cedar Rapids. Of course, going back to the right, there's the Build the Wall. And then I think one of the most preeminent cases is the Tax the Rich dress at the Met Gala that AOC wore. But it's not about really sending a message as it is about going viral and getting attention. In any of these cases, really. Uh, in Hillary Clinton's defense, this video about just chilling in Cedar Rapids wasn't meant to go viral, and it just sort of did. And sometimes intentional, sometimes unintentional. As we're about to discuss, sometimes it's hard to tell the difference. Played a big point, uh, big factor in even the last election. There was dark MAGA on one side, and the Kamala Harris campaign trying to own the coconut tree quote in her campaign. And yet sometimes in both cases it can feel kind of cheap and kind of dumb, but that's what virality is really about a lot of the time. If we're going to talk about viral politicians, then I'm going to throw out something for my man Junjun Soda in his viral slogan, "I'll do my best, but I can't promise anything." Honest politician, don't know a thing about the guy, and I like liking him, so I intentionally don't learn anything about him. I don't even know if he won. Uh, it's in a way sort of like Slender Man. The less lore you know, the better. I don't know any Slender Man lore, don't know any Junjun Soto lore, and I like keeping it that way. So another thing, aside from lower barriers to entry, or sort of stemming from that, is more people have entered and there's more options to choose from. So if you don't like a news channel, you can probably find a website, influencer, or podcast that you do like. These alternatives have less barrier to entry, so there's more options, as I just discussed. So last class we talked about these very mainline, balanced evening news shows, and in the 80s and 90s they began to fracture into left and right wing cable. Um, and then as time goes on, of course, it fractures into right and left wing online news, and then online influencers. So even more independent than something like left leaning, but still like online news like BuzzFeed. Fracturing off into that, into the millions of former BuzzFeed journalists who became influencers. A great example of this is actually not from cable, but from Radio 4. Um, as we're going to talk about later, I love listening to one particular show on Radio 4 called In Our Time. On a different show, though, a frequent contributor journalist on it was this woman here, who I think from the get-go was very explicitly left-wing, Arianna Huffington. But she went from Radio 4 to her own website that was called HuffPost. So Arianna Huffington, HuffPost. I hope you're able to track so far. But within HuffPost, especially Obama years, very pro-Obama. And within it, you have sort of left of Obama energy from a lot of the journalists. One of them being this fella, Ryan Grim. So you can see here, reporting for the Huffington Post. So this is a case of mainstream, so literally government news at this point, BBC going to online news, one of their journalists, Ryan Grim, talking on cable news, but representing online news. And then he goes on to an online news show called Breaking Points, where he and three other journalists, two on the left, two on the right, try to balance things out. So while he's still very much on the left, we've got a guy who has this very strange career trajectory. His boss started off mainstream, then went to online, but with a website, and then to more in the camera influencing. So talking about how everything fragments with these lower entry costs, uh, instead of left-wing cable or right-wing cable, you have Arianna Huffington starting her own news site, and then that being what kicked off a left-wing influencer. I'd say one of the biggest cases is the fall of BuzzFeed. And if you're a millennial, I know you know what BuzzFeed is. Hopefully, if you're Gen Z, you're like, what the hell is BuzzFeed? Just keep it that way. Like Jinjin Sato or Slender Man or Iron Lung, it's just the less you know, the better. That being said, now we have all these options, as you can see in the bottom row. So let's get into that. Well, say you don't even want the options, you just like mainstream cable. Well, a lot of the older cable personalities have been fired over the years for various reasons, and who cares who needs cable at this point? They start their own podcasts. So on the left, you have Don Lemon or Don Lemon. I've heard it pronounced both ways. I don't know how he says it. And on the right, you have Tucker Carlson. So Don Lemon and Tucker Carlson both have their own podcast now, even though they came directly from cable. So they skipped the whole online news site or news aggregator site and became very individualistic influencers because they still had that kind of name recognition. And because we're so spoiled for choice, you can really choose what you want, right? Like, say you are thinking about leaving the right or leaving the left, and you want to listen to someone who's more of a convert. There's probably a show for you. If you are a socialist and class politics is all you really want to focus on or all you really want to consume, there's tons of influencers and options for that. Same with LGBT, feminism, economics. If you don't care about any one thing, but overall like a lifestyle aesthetic, there's plenty of left and right wing aesthetic lifestyle podcasts, influencers for all that kind of stuff too. So yeah, I mean, there's just a ton of different options now. So going from just CBS evening news to this is a lot. You can really find whatever you want. The thing is that they generally like to keep you in just a constant state of panic over the next thing in that same dopamine loop we talked about on Tuesday. because you want to figure out what's going to happen next. You always want to be in the know. Another interesting case, by the way, is so this is politics influencing media, but then there's this weird case of media influencing politics where this has become a tryouts, I guess we would say, for being politicians. Director of the FBI, Kash Patel, started off as a podcaster. As you can see on the top row, Dan Bongino was deputy director of the FBI until he resigned a month or two ago. So it's also a way to prove your worth to politicians and you get a promotion essentially. I'm probably going to get some of this wrong because I don't really listen to any of these people, but far left, far right, if you identify with that, you can go there, find the product you want, sort of slightly left, well, still far left, far right, but not as extreme. There's a place for you. So you can meet somewhere in the middle. Oddly enough, there's Ryan Grimm with his other three co-hosts. Still, two of them are left wing, two of them are right wing. Point being, you can find something almost tailored to you. My main caveat to that, though, is that you're never going to find someone who's perfectly balanced, perfectly objective. Generally, everybody has bias, or they're like me and they just don't care. So what I would recommend is not subscribing to one, but think of it like a diet, and diversifying your ideas, what you're exposed to. If you're just going to listen to people that you agree with, or that are just going to confirm your biases or what you already believe, there's not really any point in listening to them because it's just going to self-reinforce. This is, go out, play frisbee golf or whatever. Like, you don't need to worry about it. I kind of like using them as icebreakers. I think it's fun. Way to get to know the people is to just ask like, hey, what podcasts are you subscribed to and stuff like that. How little I care about like the day to day of what's going on in politics. I listen to BBC in our time, which is where they have group of professors come on and then like talk about some very obscure thing like medieval pilgrimages or the concept of hope. Fully emblematic. I've listened to that since high school. Pekingology because I need to stay, sharp on Chinese issues. I'm currently intermediate on ChinaPod. Um, what is it? Working on how to order a steak medium rare right now. And then, of course, because I write and do all that stuff, the Skyrim soundtrack. And then the final main point is mis/dis/malinformation. For short, I'll call it misdismal information because I think that's funny. But misinformation is when the info is false, but the person sharing it thinks it is true. I've had a lot of people tell me like, "Oh, the government has 100% confirmed that aliens exist," and no, they have not. But it's not intended to harm. Disinformation is info that is intentionally false and is intended to harm. We'll get into that in a second. And then malinformation, information that is true but is weaponized. A good modern example of that is doxing. That's really your address, but I'm not putting it out for any altruistic reasons. Going into misinformation in more detail, the info is false, but the person sharing it thinks it is true and it's not intended to harm. Great example being the Paul is dead conspiracy, where a ton of people thought the Beatle Paul McCartney was dead based on some very shaky evidence. And one of my favorite interviews ever is Chris Farley interviewing Paul McCartney. They're sitting next to each other. And Chris Farley asks him, but you weren't actually dead, were you? And then Paul McCartney replies, no, I wasn't actually dead. Chris Farley's a comedian, by the way, so it makes more sense in context. Early Facebook days, you'd have people putting up this very cringe post thinking that it would like stop Facebook from using their private data that they'd already put on Facebook, so it's not that private. Um, yeah, just misunderstanding of the law. Not really meant to hurt anything. And then one case that actually did end in death was the U.S. resistance to believing that Japan would ever attack Pearl Harbor. Instead of yet another Pearl Harbor photo, I decided to put quote from Man Stabbed. But another example, I think, that is a bit more touchy would be vaccines. Anti-vaccine people don't want children to die of typhus and whooping cough and all these like really old diseases we thought were done, as they think they're protecting people. There's no intent in harming or unvaccinated information, but it's still false, and vaccines still do save lives. And you can compare that to, well, the difference between that and disinformation is intent. Neither one are true, but disinformation is intended to cause harm, if you're tracking. So a case of that being fake news about this election in the UK, saying it's going to be held over 2 days. So if you can't make the election today, don't worry about it. So many people are voting, you can come tomorrow. But you can't, and you're not going to be able to vote if you don't come today. So it's meant to depress the vote, which generally favors one side, or in the UK, with all those parties, I don't actually know who that would favor, but still it is meant to mess up the election. More funny example would be in 2014 with this introduction of what was called iWave or Wave. But it was a prank ad campaign from the darker corners of the internet that was, like I said, a prank focusing on convincing people that with the new updates in the new iPhone, advanced algorithms, which is not how algorithms work, but advanced algorithms make it so you can put your phone in a microwave, set it on high for 2 minutes, and then the wave, being the microwaves, will charge your phone. So you can go from 0 to 100 charging in 2 minutes. This is intended to cause harm. This is not true. Please do not microwave your phones. Because what it was really meant to do is prank people into microwaving and destroying their phones. This led to a bunch of people calling 911 about their phones being on fire. I'm not quite sure how they're able to call 911, but that's neither here nor there. But it's not true and intended to cause harm. So we can reiterate, vaccines save lives, don't microwave your phone. One of the more nefarious, ill-intentioned examples was the Benghazi attacks were blamed on this YouTube video, The Innocence of Muslims. Do not look up this video. I don't even know if it's on YouTube. I haven't watched it or looked it up since 2012 when all this went down. It's not good. It's not interesting. It's just a guy who's intentionally being offensive against Muslims. What made this such a big case, though, I mean, the guy was honestly honest about him not liking Muslims and him being a racist and all that, specifically against Arabs. But this video was blamed uh, the this video took the blame for the Benghazi attacks for a very long time because the Obama administration said that the Benghazi compound was raided because Muslim people were very upset about this video. That was not the case. It had nothing to do with the Benghazi attacks, but it was a convenient scapegoat for it. So this is actually the government using disinformation to obfuscate the Obama administration's failures around Benghazi. And finally, there's malinformation. So mis, dis, mal, all different words for bad. The info is true, but it's released intentionally to cause harm. So doxing or publishing someone's address online is a preeminent, very major example of that. It happens to influencers and politicians, actually. I remember one case of this that's very preeminent that nobody really talks about at all. But because I'm from South Carolina, I remember this, I think, a bit more. Lindsey Graham, our senator, had his phone number, his personal phone number, read out at a rally at a politician I'm not going to name. And the politician who read out his personal phone number encouraged everybody at the rally to call him and to get private information. Eventually, Lindsey Graham had to change his phone number. Also, info that's true but released to cause harm. We talked about the Podesta emails. So, in case you don't remember, 2016, John Podesta, chairman of the DNC, is hacked through a phishing scam by agents associated with the Russian government. And all these very damaging emails about how the DNC does not want Bernie Sanders to be the nominee in 2016 come out. So it's true info, but the Russian government released it to cause harm within American society and make it more divisive. Now, who's more to blame, the DNC or Russia? It kind of shows your priority of values, and whatever you say is more to blame, but it's still an interesting case. Or if we're going on to China studies, Chinese politics, like I like to study, it's the Secret Speech by Khrushchev. After Stalin dies, Khrushchev comes to power, and he gives what's called the Secret Speech to the Soviet Politburo, the main powerhouse within the Soviet Union, where he talks about how cults of personality, like the one around Stalin, were a bad idea. The thing is the Soviet Union's best ally at the time is Communist China, who still has a cult of personality around Mao Zedong. So the speech leaks, and then an intelligence service publishes it. It gets to China that the Soviet Union doesn't like cults of personality. Of course, Mao sees this and says, hey, no one ruins my reputation but me, and proceeds to ruin his reputation during the Sino-Soviet split, so destroying the Soviet-Chinese alliance. But based off true information that was released to cause harm. All right. After dunking on Russia twice in the last slide, I need to reiterate this. When I lived in China, I had a Russian roommate, Alexei. Loved that guy to death. He was awesome. We had a dispute with a neighbor, and he helped me prank the absolute hell out of him. That's a different story. So, I personally, no beef with Russians. With that, let's go back to dunking on Russia and its connections with misinformation. 2016, of course, Hillary Clinton loses in the surprise upset, blames the Russian hacking, Russia exposing the bias within her own party for her loss, and it's what kicks off the Russiagate scandal, which ended up being a giant nothing burger after the Mueller investigation found no evidence of collusion. So there was Russian influence in the election, but every government influences every election to some degree. Russia more direct, but no evidence of collusion. Ends up with a long conspiracy theory that Russia had hacked the 2016 election, and that's the only reason Trump won. But before you feel too bad for Trump, don't forget that there was the Stop the Steal in 2020, where Trump had claimed that his own election loss in 2020 was hacked. So malinformation all around. It's almost too democratized because people can say whatever they want, spread whatever news they want, and because we still have this instinctual trust of written text and authority, we aren't really critical enough of what we read and hear on the right or the left in this case. One of the best single cases around this is what happened in Houston, Texas on May 21st, 2016. What happened was that a Facebook group had organized a rally called the Stop Islamification of Texas. So stop Texas from being Muslim. And across the street, another Facebook group had organized a rally called Save Islamic Knowledge, so pro-Muslim. How would you feel if I told you that both of these Facebook groups that organized these very polar opposite rallies, but both Facebook groups had deep ties to Russian intelligence? Specifically a group called the IRA, or Internet Research Agency, not the Irish Revolutionary Army, but Internet Research Agency, and had intentionally made that pro and anti-Muslim rally would be across the street from each other at the same time, at the same day, at the same city, resulting in a lot of toxicity, violence, name calling. Well, I don't actually think it came to violence, but still. This is the power of disinformation, misinformation, malinformation. People do trust what they read a lot. People did not know that these rallies were not made to have any moral bearing on Islam at all, but to pit Americans against Americans because that helps Russia. It's food for thought. It's very interesting. And before you believe everything you read online, it's worth thinking about. Now, of course, the new issue is how AI plays into all of this, right? Which honestly, being on sort of the precipice of AI being introduced the way it has been, I wasn't really aware or conscious for a lot of the early internet stuff. I was still a baby. But the way we hear people talk about that, it feels kind of like AI is the next iteration of that. So there's some cases like this where a viral pro-Trump post claimed that this woman is the American commander who bombed Iran, who said women can't be great or do great things, smart, beautiful, strong, and patriotic. I used to be an English teacher in China, so the first thing that stands out to me in this is the lack of an Oxford comma, which I do not approve of. As someone who went to military school, though, I find issue with the belief that a staff sergeant would be commanding bombings in Iran. But there were some claims that this post was AI generated, other claims that it's real and it's just a staff sergeant standing in front of Trump and a bunch of senior officials. But this is real images used to push fake news, which is sort of the way things have been up until AI slop. And then there's sort of AI slop, so like videos like the Trump Gaza plan. Purely speculative, not really based in any reality. I mean, it might happen. I don't want to say the possibility is zero, but I would say the odds are very low, and it's yeah, we'll just leave it at it's very speculative and completely AI generated. But then there's this weird inverse to that. Before you think I'm dunking on the Trump administration too much, we have this video from a few years ago, Biden seemingly wandering off during a G7 conference. I believe that's Meloni from Italy telling him to come back. But when this video came out, the Biden press secretary, Karine Jean-Pierre, said it was a quote-unquote cheap fake, which sounds similar to the term deep fake, which means AI. So she was indirectly saying that this video was AI generated. She would never cop to it, I think now, because there's enough degrees of separation. But with how people understood it, and with the intent, it seemed as if she was saying that this very real video is AI generated. So on the left and the middle, we have fake events being, sorry, I mean, on the left and the right, we have fake events being blamed on AI, or real events being blamed on AI for the fake connotations. Sort of in the middle of it all, we have what is AI now. People are concerned on what are the possibilities of AI in the future. What do we do when we see AI videos of different people being shot, similar to Charlie Kirk, who haven't actually been shot though? What do we do when we see AI videos of stuff that looks similar to September 11th? Are we going to believe it? Does the government have enough credibility to say that it's AI and have us believe it, like with either the cases on the left or right? Who knows? What I would say is just be cognizant of these issues. Most of you, I imagine, are younger than me, so you'll have more resistance against it. And for me, the real issue is not falling for it like a boomer falling for a Nigerian prince scammer. So with the introduction of internet and how it affects foreign policy, what it really does is it can convince people of lies, but it can also reveal the truth. The issue is that we really don't have the resistance to lies or to be able to discern the truth that's able to follow how fast the internet is able to advance. As we discussed, that's because of reduced communication costs. So many more people can access the internet and wider audiences, less gatekeeping. So very similar to that, to where if you want to make a career in this, it's much easier. Increased supply and options, sort of the inverse, more people have more ability to listen to whatever they want. And because of that, bad actors are able to put out a ton more bad information, and human psyche, our inherent trusting of written text, hasn't really caught up to fake information. Now, with AI, we always trusted written text for a long time. Well, we've trusted our own eyes for longer. So when we see videos, sort of a gold standard of what's believable, and we're going to have to catch up to the idea of videos also very possibly being faked. So, how does this affect foreign policy without just putting a big capstone on it and saying it's complicated? Well, especially in democracies where the government is responsive to how people feel, there's more visibility, so the government can monitor externally more easily. More threats and stuff like that are more easily quashed. On the inverse, though, the government can monitor internally more easily. And there's more information, which is similar to visibility, but people are generally more aware of social causes. At the same time, there's more dismal information that we really don't have a resistance to yet. I'm sure it will come with time. And we are going to leave it there. I hope you all stay warm in this late March, mid-late March week. And I look forward to talking to the rest of you, talking at y'all, not really talking with y'all, next week. So hope you have a good one. See ya.